Hello, you're watching a special coronavirus catch-up. I'm Jordan Kenny. Welcome to the programme. Tonight, we're hoping to answer your questions on all things to do with COVID-19. So whether that's about the new variant, Omicron, whether it's about COVID passports or certs, whatever you want to call them, or whether it's about travel ahead of Christmas. There's a lot of people are worried about their travel plans coming up to the holidays. Whatever it is that you want to know, feel free to get in touch with us. We're here for the next 45 minutes or so to answer your questions. And one thing that's different this time around is I'm joined in person by our health correspondent, Mary-Louise Connolly, and our political correspondent, Jane McCormick. And that's not all. We're also joined down the line by our business reporter, Richard Morgan. He's at home in front of his lovely Christmas tree. Guys, thanks for joining me. Mary-Louise, Jane, great to see you in person again. Richard, obviously you're at home. I hope you don't feel too left out that you're not here in the studio with us. Yeah, we've guys, how are you? It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good. How long has it been since we...
June, about 6 months, coming up 6 months, so it's hard to believe. But Mary-Louise, I think the best place to start tonight is probably with you. Obviously, it's been about 6 months since we last spoke, and in the past week or two, we've heard about this new variant, Omicron or Omicron. Well, let's get that out of the way. How do you pronounce it? Is it Omicron, Omicron? Shed some light there, Mary-Louise.
You say tomato, I say tomato. It's
one of those.
Omicron. It's O with emphasis on the O. It's the 15th letter of the Greek alphabet for all those who might be heading off to quizzes, pub quizzes in a little while.
Thank you.
So it's the 15th letter, Jane, of the Greek alphabet. Hopefully Barra's not listening because he's heading off to the same quiz. So we pronounce it O, Omicron.
Right, well, Jane, there's a point for you tonight.
Yeah, I know, I've
your
mentally
pub quiz.
noted it, so I'm going to pay credit to Mary-Louise if I win on the basis of that alone.
Share the prize money.
Think how many variants we've had so far, you know, with the Alpha, and the Delta, and now Omicron, and, you know, no doubt there will be others as they just make their way down through the Greek alphabet.
It's hard to believe, but now that that's all cleared up, we know how to pronounce it. What's the latest? Where is it? What is it, Mary-Louise?
Well, as we broadcast tonight, there are no officially confirmed cases of Omicron in Northern Ireland, and they have been testing, we understand, from maybe Sunday, Monday, several specific cases. These originated from someone who arrived in Northern Ireland from South Africa via Dublin. So those cases have been the PCR test. They showed a slight variation that caused a little bit of concern. So they're sent on for further genome sequencing because something was detected. So twice a day, we check in with the authorities. We ask the Public Health Agency any word back on these tests. And we're now on to Thursday, and they've said, up until I came on air this evening, no confirmation yet of Omicron in Northern Ireland. We have one case in the Republic, several cases, I think, is it 13 in Scotland, 29 in England. The view is that there's bound to be an awful lot more than that in the UK at the moment, which is worrying, but officially, they're the numbers.
Okay, well, we'll get to the questions sent in by viewers. The first one tonight is from Jackie, Mary-Louise, and she wants to know, do we know if any of the confirmed Omicron cases have previously had COVID? So is reinfection possible with this variant?
Well, the World Health Organization dealt with this yesterday in a major press conference, and they said, that the indications, and there are signs, particularly from what they have seen happening in South Africa, that people are being reinfected. And the whole thing about Omicron is its rate of how transmissible it is. In the last 24 hours, there have been something like 11,500 new cases of COVID in South Africa. That's up something like 38% from last week. It's highly transmissible, and therefore, yes, more people are being reinfected.
Okay, Mary-Louise, with plenty more questions on Omicron for you tonight. But before we come back to them, we'll have a chat with Jane. Jane, let's talk about travel. Obviously, this new variant has made a lot of people worried about their travel plans ahead of Christmas. But Rosie, she's been in touch and she's asked, as best as we can guess, what can we anticipate for Christmas holiday travel?
I think that's just really hard to predict. At the moment, Jordan, I mean, you talked about how we hadn't been on this programme since June, and over the summer, obviously travel has opened up massively. I think the industry really needed it. We had the changes around self-isolation rules if you were fully jabbed. We had the changes around not needing to do PCR tests, so you could do the lateral flow test when you were coming back into the country if you'd been away on holiday. Those things all helped the tourism industry, but as it stands now, things look a bit more precarious because we had that announcement over the weekend, obviously around moving some countries back onto the red list. So I think 10 countries all based in Africa, are currently on that red list. So anybody that is coming in from there has to self-isolate. They have to take the PCR test. If it's, I think that's by the end of day 2, they have to take it. If it's negative, they don't need to self-isolate anymore. But if it is positive, obviously they have to isolate for the 10 days. At this stage, I think all the indications are that there's no real change to move more countries all of a sudden or dramatically onto the red list. I think governments would like to try and keep travel open as much as they can, particularly when you think about the fact that America only opened its borders earlier in November. But these things move quickly. If you remember, over last year, once things were starting to get difficult again, countries were being moved on and off the red list, the amber list, the green list all of the time. So I think it's just a case of watching us, watching for updates and seeing how these things move, because as Mary-Louise has mentioned, Omicron could all of a sudden move quickly, and that governments will just have to respond to that.
Okay, well, plenty more questions coming for you tonight as well, Jane. But before we get to those, we'll speak to Richard. Richard, like I said, I don't know if you've pulled the short straw or the long straw. Being at home tonight means you don't have to come into work. You're maybe sitting in your slippers right now. But
it would have been nice to see everyone in person, but here
definitely.
we are. You get to see
that's
my
one
tree.
of the benefits. Yeah, and that's enough for us, Richard. But plenty of questions on COVID passports or certs coming your way tonight. Obviously, they come into use on Monday. We're currently in the 2-week grace period that is allowing them to settle in and let people get used to them. But just remind us, Richard, where do we actually need to show our COVID certs to gain entry?
Yeah, so those businesses were being told that they should start the checks on Monday as that grace period begins, but many industry groups saying that they just simply weren't ready. There hadn't been enough details, so this bedding in period will allow for the training of staff. In terms of where you need it at the minute and where it will be enforced from December 13th, any indoor events with more than 500 people where some or all of the audience are not normally seated, outdoor events with more than 4,000 people, all events with more than 10,000 people. And then in terms of hospitality, you have nightclubs and licensed venues like bars and restaurants. In terms of unlicensed hospitality, it was given that reprieve last Friday. So cafes and the likes, coffee shops, don't have to check COVID certification unless they have an occasional license or they have a bring your own policy. Then the checks do need to be carried out. And it's also worth reminding people, as I think this got a bit lost in some of the coverage, is that cinemas, theatres and conference halls also have to check COVID certification.
Right, Richard, a question for you from James on the COVID passports. Will COVID certs from other countries or parts of the UK be accepted in hospitality venues and other places that they're needed here?
So the Department of Health says that it has an agreement with various countries, particularly EU countries and the likes of Scotland and Wales, that the QR codes, the travel certs that they have will work with the scanner app that businesses here will be using. Now, people who arrive in Northern Ireland and maybe are travelling or visiting and using a QR code from another country have been told that they'll need to have photographic ID just to verify their COVID cert. But having been to the Republic of Ireland for a number of days and also been to Italy recently, our app works there, so it's basically the same arrangements. It's almost like a swap, an agreement that your QR codes will work. So visitors shouldn't be concerned, or if people are coming home for Christmas and they were living somewhere else and got their certification there, their vaccines there, by all means it should work along with that photographic ID for verification.
Thanks for that, Richard. Okay, we'll move on to well, actually, before we go to the next question.
Have you downloaded your cert yet?
Well, I have downloaded my cert.
How easy was it to do?
The longest part for me was taking the selfie. I couldn't get it right, couldn't get the
couldn't get your hair right, probably.
I mean, talk to me about it, Mary-Louise. Yeah. It was a nightmare.
No, this went on in our house for about 3 days.
Yeah.
Because there was shadows on the photograph and we had to do the selfie again and again. My husband, it took him half an hour. It took myself and someone else in the house a lot longer. It's not the easiest process.
No, there's a lot of steps to go through, and you've to verify your account on NI Direct, so you have to get either your driver's license or a passport, and if you don't have one of those, it's a lot trickier as well, because you're into the territory of birth certificates, of TV licenses and everything. So yeah, there's a lot to go through with it. So if people are going places, they should allow enough time to get their COVID cert before.
Have you?
Oh yeah, but mine, I had quite an easy experience. It took me 5 minutes.
Oh, one of the lucky ones.
Maybe I don't know how that happened. I have other colleagues in the politics unit who have had serious difficulty. Gareth Gordon among them. It took him quite a long period of time. It seems to be a bit of like hit or miss, or just a bit of luck. What the department have told me though is that if you're having difficulty getting either the paper or the app version downloaded, at the moment there is kind of interim guidance that they will accept your vaccine card that you got when you got your first vaccination, along with your photo ID. So they will take that. So people don't need to panic around this. There's time to get it. I think today they said the helpline was receiving around 3,000 calls a day. So there's a lot of pressure on the system. It will take time. So there are other options in the meantime.
Good to know. Right, Mary-Louise, this next question for you, it's a bit of a double whammy, so we'll start with the first part. Whoever sent it in hasn't put their name on it either, but it's asking about the symptoms of COVID. So the main symptoms that we have all been told to look out for, from the beginning of the pandemic, are of course the high temperature, the continuous or the new and continuous cough, or the loss of taste or smell. This question says, I tested positive this week. My symptoms are flu-like, so aches and pains, very sore head, blocked nose. Will the current list of symptoms be updated?
Well, this is interesting, because if you go on to the gov.uk website and you ask what are the current symptoms for COVID, they actually haven't changed, as you say, from the start. So it is the cough, the high temperature, loss of taste and smell. But anyone who has had COVID, or a lot of people, will just add to those symptoms saying, it's a runny nose, it's a very, very sore head, aches and pains, almost that you feel like flu. So we put it to the Public Health Agency earlier this afternoon. Will you be updating the symptoms? And they said, well, the symptoms at the moment have been agreed by the 4 chief medical officers. At the moment they are sticking to these: the cough, the high temperature, loss of taste and smell. But as we know, people who have been tested, the symptoms go much, much further than that. So at the moment, no, they are not being updated. But we know from experience and from lots of documentation and data that has been produced, COVID symptoms stretch much further, particularly with Delta, and particularly Delta among younger people. It does feel like a really, really bad cold.
Okay, well, the second part of that question asks, you were talking about Delta there, Mary-Louise, do different variants have different symptoms?
Not really, no. It seems to depend on the person and also the age group of the person. Younger people seem to experience really bad cold symptoms. And the danger with that is, if you think you're just experiencing a bad cold, a headache, sore limbs, you may go about your business, maybe go to college, university, go about, visit an older person. And the fear is that you could be passing that on to someone who has maybe an underlying health problem, and the impact on them could be a lot worse. So the guidance at the moment is, if you experience any of these cold or flu-like symptoms, do a lateral flow test. And I know in England, in a house full of students, 5 people on Tuesday night, 1 girl came in and said she didn't feel great, she had flu-like symptoms. They all did a lateral flow test in the student house. 2 of the students tested positive on the lateral flow test. All 5 then went on to have PCR tests, and 3 now have tested positive for COVID. So the lateral flow tests worked, and they were on the basis of experiencing really a bad, heavy cold.
Shows you the importance of those lateral flow tests
definitely.
as well. I noticed we're getting some questions on Facebook. We will come to those shortly. Just before we get to those, Jane, actually I want to ask you something that's been kind of doing the rounds today on social media. There's a WhatsApp message that's been going about, written as though it come from someone who was on the executive. I saw Michelle O'Neill tweeted about misinformation on social media earlier. That message, totally fake, right?
Yeah, so I think we can just nail this now. Earlier today, there seemed to be this social media message, WhatsApp message. I only became aware of it because I was getting messages from people on Twitter asking me, was lockdown coming? I didn't receive the message myself, but a friend did and passed it on, and basically it was setting out that lockdown was due to be coming back and all these various restrictions. In no way, I think it's fair to say, would we find something like that out via WhatsApp? And Michelle O'Neill, the Deputy First Minister, pretty quickly took to Twitter, called it bogus, said it was simply not true, and basically said that this was kind of showed the dangers again of misinformation, which we've become so aware of, I think, over the past 19, 20 months. But unfortunately, I think there will be people who will maybe have got that message via a friend or a family member, and they maybe don't watch the news as much as we do, or they're maybe not able to see it frequently, and they might have just seen it and they've become panicked all of a sudden. If there was going to be something like that, trust news sources, trust verified journalists who are working on these things. I think we can categorically state that we have no indications of anything like that. It would be up to the executive to take those decisions. There'd be long days of discussions, protracted discussions like we had around this time last year. So it's not, I don't think it's going to all of a sudden come from nowhere, and it's certainly not going to come via social media.
Yeah, so important to be wary of those WhatsApp messages as well. I'm never done telling my parents about this. Stop forwarding on these messages. But Jane, Emma has sent in a question about schools. She is wanting to know, are schools expected to close earlier for Christmas due to this new variant?
Obviously, there was some concern about that earlier in the week. We had some teaching unions and individual principals of schools who have been experiencing pressures going on the airwaves and talking about the difficulties that they have been having, either because they have had reduced staffing levels due to illness for one reason or another, or there have been issues around COVID protocols that has impacted their classes. At the moment, what we are told is that schools across the board are not closing early. I think the executive discussed some measures around schools today and issued a pretty bland statement afterwards, and just said that they are working to keep schools open and that they're conscious of the safety measures in classrooms. But none of the guidance or anything that we've talked about with officials at Stormont has been that schools could close early, as has been suggested by some. Now, there might be individual schools that may take the decision to close a few days early in order to give their staff a break. But I think the view from Stormont is that it was such a massive decision to close schools last March, and to do so again over that Christmas period, and all the problems that were presented by homeschooling. They don't want to be there again. And if we were to get to a point where that happened, I think that would demonstrate the seriousness of where we would be. And it doesn't look like we're at that yet.
Okay. We'll come back to Richard and his lovely Christmas tree. Actually, just on the Christmas tree, Mary-Louise, you said on Twitter earlier this week that you weren't going to come tonight unless we had Christmas music on Coronavirus Catch-Up Night.
Very demanding.
We haven't been able to break. We've tried to do our best Christmas festive. We've got mince pies.
Are
for
they
you
real?
here. They're real mince pies. I mean,
Okay,
be my
impressed.
guest. I'm not a mince pie lover, but if you want one of those,
Yeah.
go for it. But Richard, he's also bringing the festive vibes. He's got his Christmas tree and might sing us out.
I'm
with a
sad there's no
carol
Christmas
later.
jumper
What's,
though.
what's on top of the
know
tree?
if
We
I'll sing
can't
us
see.
out.
We can't see the top of the tree. Is
so-
it a star or a fairy or?
So I have to confess that actually we have found ourselves this week without a star for the top of the tree. So we have ordered one. It just hasn't arrived yet.
Okay,
so,
we'll have a
you're
whip
only
round.
you're only seeing the best bits.
Mary-Louise has offered a whip round there for a star for the top of your tree, Richard. But coming back to you on COVID certs, this one's from Cormac. He said his domestic COVID cert keeps getting locked, which is actually something that happened to mine yesterday, which resulted in my second attempt at all those selfies. But can you use your COVID cert, Richard, can you use your travel cert as proof of vaccination in the meantime if you can't use your domestic cert?
So it's interesting that you referenced there as you were taking another selfie. I've just decided to live with the selfie that I have that I took after an early shift one morning, which probably wasn't the best time after doing Good Morning Ulster. But the Department of Health has said that your COVID cert will lock for 24 hours if you change the photo, if you change that selfie, so you'll be locked out for 24 hours. And it's also said that it will lock if you try to add it to another device, because you can only have it on one device, and that is a security feature to try to prevent fraud. They have said that you can use your travel cert because the QR code on the travel cert, that is basically proof of your second vaccination, and that as long as you use that with photographic ID, because the travel cert doesn't have photographic ID, that would be sufficient. And as Jane mentioned earlier, at the moment and for now, the little card you get when you get your second vaccine, they are accepting it as proof of COVID status, of COVID vaccination status, along with photographic ID, so driver's license, passport, whatever you choose to use.
Cheers for that, Richard. I'm just going to go to some of the Facebook questions here. Mary-Louise, this one probably best for you, from Katrina. She wants to know what happens if you do a lateral flow test and it's negative, but your PCR is positive.
You have to go with the PCR test. The PCR test is the one that the experts would all say that we should be checking. And we know people who have done lateral flow tests that are negative, but these symptoms persist, and they've done the right thing by going for a PCR test just to be sure. And so many of those PCR tests then prove to be positive.
Okay. This one, Richard, this one's probably best for you. This is from Brendan, and he's saying his local restaurant asked for his COVID pass, but Tesco's did not. You don't have to show your COVID cert for shops, that's right, isn't it?
That's correct. Retail and the likes are exempt from COVID certification. It's mainly really large events, licensed hospitality premises, and somewhere where you're maybe going to be for a while with other people, like the cinema, the theatre, and conference events, which are taking place. There's one tomorrow taking place in Belfast. 200 delegates are attending, and they must all prove their COVID status in order to gain entry. But in terms of shops, no, the regulation for shops at the minute remains around face coverings.
And Jane, this one probably best for you. You're like our travel correspondent tonight. This is from Gary. He wants to know, are there any tests needed for travel between Northern Ireland and the UK? And is it guaranteed that they won't be implemented at a later stage if there isn't?
Well, I can't probably answer the second part of the question definitively, because with COVID, there just aren't really many guarantees. So if you're travelling from Northern Ireland to other parts of the UK, there is no rule that you need to take a PCR test before you go. A lot of the rules around that for foreign travel have changed, and certainly they were never really in place for domestic travel. However, if you go on the NI Direct website, which does have a lot of the latest information about coronavirus and restrictions from the executive, I think they will always say in guidance that there's advice if you want to do a lateral flow test before you travel, then that's always worth doing, just to be sure, to give you the peace of mind that you are travelling and that you feel safe. Likewise, I think even in the last week, we have seen a ramping up of the executive's campaign around people going out over Christmas. If you're going to do your Christmas shopping, take a lateral flow test before you go out. If you're going to meet some friends to socialise, for that peace of mind again, take a lateral flow test. Now, it's not a firm rule, but I think they would like people to do it, and I think that will continue certainly over Christmas, but that's the guidance at the moment.
And we can get these lateral flow tests for free,
You can order them online on the NHS website. You'll get them delivered to your house within 24 hours in some cases. So they are easy to get. They come in packs of 7, I think, at a time. And then if you want to register, one of the other ways to get in to venues, if you don't have that COVID passport, if you haven't been fully vaccinated at the moment, is you can show proof of a negative lateral flow test taken up to 48 hours beforehand. And so you can take that lateral flow test and then input the results online, and that will give you the little QR code that you need in order to get into places.
It's really important, though, to do those tests properly. They're not that pleasant, but I think more often you do them, you do get used to them.
You become.
You definitely get more used to it. And if you are doing them every other day, which some people are doing, you do realise that there is a technique to doing it, and it does give you peace of mind whenever you are heading out, particularly if you're heading up to maybe your folks or to visit an older person or just out and about, that you've done it properly, that maybe you've sneezed as a result of doing it, or you've gagged a little bit, because you do have to do it properly. There's no point in just, whizzing it about and saying, oh, there, I've done my lateral flow test. It's pointless. Do it properly and do it right, and then you can head out with a bit of confidence.
It's the nose for me. It always has my eyes, streaming, sneezing, but, important to do. Yeah. Mary-Louise, this question is from Katrina, another Katrina. She's asking about patients in intensive care units. So she wants to know how many of Northern Ireland's COVID-19 patients that are in the ICU have been double vaccinated. Is that information that we get told?
Not really, no. And the only way that I can talk about it is having been in and out of ICU units and hospitals. For instance, last week we were in a hospital emergency department and ICU, and what we were told, it was almost like a ratio of 7 to 3, 7 people unvaccinated, 3 were vaccinated. Now, as time is going on and the vaccine is waning, what the hospitals are experiencing is that older people who have been double jabbed are ending up back in hospital. Most of those people who are double jabbed and who require hospitalisation mostly have underlying health problems. Now, if you look at a UK number today, they're saying it's about 60% of people at the moment are unvaccinated in ICU, 40% aren't. So that's the way it is looking at the moment. Those people, though, who are double jabbed aren't as severely impacted by COVID. So the evidence is you're better off to get the vaccine. Yes, you may become ill because we know it's not 100% foolproof, but you have a better chance of not ending up in intensive care.
Okay, Cian, Todd has a question for you. Richard's obviously been telling us the need to knows on COVID passports, where we need them to use them. But Todd wants to know, what's the justification or evidence that's been given for the move to COVID passports? So obviously it wasn't you who made the decision to introduce them, but what have the politicians been saying?
Yeah, so they took this decision a couple of weeks ago. We know that it wasn't unanimous because the 4 DUP ministers and the executive voted against it, but the Department of Health's view, which was the health advice that was then passed on to the ministers before they made their decision, was that COVID certification, they believe, can reduce the number of infected people in high-risk settings. They also feel that if you've got vaccinated people, they are less likely to become infected and then go on to affect then unvaccinated people. So they're saying that there is also evidence of this from several studies worldwide that they have quoted, and they've said that even when people get infected, if they are vaccinated, they are less likely to then transmit it to others. So that is the view that the Department of Health is sticking to, and there's also been anecdotal evidence, I suppose. We've heard from the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Sir Michael McBride, the last week, saying that since the executive took this decision, they have seen the numbers of people coming in for first doses of the vaccine increasing, which is what they've always viewed to be the case. So it wasn't just about reducing the spread of COVID. Obviously, if you're double vaccinated, you can still spread coronavirus, but it's about reducing the risk and also encouraging the uptake of the vaccine, which is what the Department of Health was really pushing for. And I think we learned today that the Northern Ireland vaccination programme has now passed the 90% mark. Yes. So I think they will also point to that and say, well, look, isn't this a positive thing? This is what we were working towards, and maybe the COVID passport scheme has helped do that. That is not to say there aren't those who aren't still very critical of this programme. We know the DUP continues to be in opposition to this. The scheme is in effect. We know that the grace period will come to an end on the 13th of December. That also seems to be the day that the Stormont Assembly will also get a vote on the measures. Now, we don't expect that to be overturned in any way because a majority of parties are still in favour of it, but there are still those who feel that this is the wrong way to go. It shouldn't be mandatory. It should be about encouraging people. But if you look to where other countries are now doing it as well, I think we're going to stick with this for now anyway.
While it's not scientific, having been out and about filming in booster, where centres who are delivering the booster and talking to staff on the ground, unprompted on Monday, some of the nurses and vaccinators did say that they had noticed that in the past 7 days there was a much better uptake of the second vaccine and boosters, and they were putting that down and just generally having conversation with people. Why have you decided to come in? They said, well, it looks like if we're want to enjoy Christmas and to get out and about and to get to bars and restaurants, we're going to need this cert. So I think it has definitely worked. And a lot of people will perhaps never admit that they were forced to do it or encouraged, but I do think it has made a difference. Why then, in the past week, have we seen our booster numbers going up considerably, as Jane says, over the 90%? And also what the authorities are saying, that those people who are in hospital now, who are over the age of 50, who have received their booster, those figures have come down.
Well, Richard, to bring you in on this, William has been in touch. He's asking, what's the situation for staff in hospitality venues or other venues where you need a COVID cert who are not vaccinated? So do the staff need a COVID cert to go to work? What's the situation there?
And this has been a real issue that Derry Chamber of Commerce had raised with me before the introduction of the COVID certification scheme, that they thought it would be very difficult for some staff in hospitality venues who may not be vaccinated to ask members of the public for COVID certification, COVID status certification. In terms of what the Department of Health says, people who work at venues or are performing at venues, they do not need to have proof, because they're essentially exempt. There's also worth saying that some of those people may be under 18, and that may be a reason why too that are working at these premises. But I do know from speaking to businesses over the course of my day-to-day job that quite a number of hospitality businesses and quite a number of people working within are, like many of us, doing those regular lateral flow tests for whatever reasons, be that due to work or due to family life or socialising. But as it stands, to go to your job, you don't have to have that vaccine certification.
Okay, well, that's the situation there. And just a reminder that we are live tonight. And if you're watching on Facebook and you've got a question, feel free to get in touch with us. You can leave it in the comments section there. I'll be able to see it and I will put it to either Mary-Louise, Jane or Richard. So, feel free to get in touch with anything that you would like to know. We'll be coming to those shortly. Before we get to those questions, Jonathan has this one for Mary-Louise. And he wants to know if Omicron is found to be more transmissible but only leads to a mild infection, is that a good thing to boost the immunity of the general population? And I suppose, what do we know actually about there being a milder infection maybe? Is there any truth in that?
Well, the jury's still out in this, and that's simply because the data isn't there at the moment for Omicron. We simply don't know. And the World Health Organization has said that hopefully within the next 3 or 4 days, they will have gathered more data about Omicron and that they can start building up the picture. But we've talked about the lag period. We all know about the lag period now. It lasts about 2 to 3 weeks before they can really form an opinion. So what they have seen in South Africa, where the variant was first seen, Omicron, and other countries, as the weeks go on, they can start building up a picture. Now, that would be really positive news if that is the case. But the jury's still out, and I don't think I'm prepared to say at this stage whether that could be the case. Having spoken to officials today in Northern Ireland, they're saying if you look at what's happening in South Africa, a lot of young people have come down with Omicron. Those who are being admitted to hospital are those who are a lot older. They have underlying health conditions. So we don't know yet the impact that Omicron is having, particularly in those countries where there's a high rate of vaccination and also now in Northern Ireland and elsewhere with the booster. So sorry, at this stage, jury's out. We just can't say.
Jury's out, but we'll keep an eye on that. Jane, Megan has this one for you. She asks, what can be done for those who are immunocompromised and clinically extremely vulnerable, whose companies won't let them work from home?
I think the first thing to say is that last week we had a bit of a change in the messaging from Stormont around working from home. So in September time, when things looked like they were getting a bit better, the executive started advising employers that while people could continue to work from home if they wanted to, employers could begin starting a return to the workplace formally, officially. I think we noticed a lot more people going back into the office space. Belfast was a bit busier at lunchtime. Then last week, in response to the rising numbers of COVID and the pressures on the health service, the ministers then took the decision to strengthen the work from home message again. So while it wasn't a formal order, what they were saying was, where possible, employers should be facilitating working from home for people. And obviously that takes into account the fact that there are now companies who may feel they can no longer afford to let people work from home, or it's just too difficult for them to manage everything if they don't have staff in their physical workspace. That being said, if you remember last year, we always had the shielding advice for those CEV people, for people who had a particular health condition. there's always been, I think, a view that where possible employers should work to allow those people who are most vulnerable to be able to work from home. Now, if a company is saying it can't do that, then I think those people do have some rights. I think there was an employment lawyer in one of our radio programmes last week saying in those cases you should be seeking further help and guidance, because the onus is really on employers at the moment to help people work from home where they can. Christmas is a time where people want to be with their friends and families, and if you maybe feel at risk in a certain workplace setting, there should be ways and means of going about it to make yourself feel more secure. Companies also have to carry out risk assessments to make sure they're doing everything they possibly can to facilitate people who have to be in the office, social distancing, face coverings, hand sanitizers. So if a company isn't doing all of those things, then I think maybe somebody who does feel a bit more vulnerable should be looking to that and seeking a bit of advice about what they can do to maybe have a better working environment from home.
Okay. Richard, Brian and Karen, they've both been in touch with a similar question, so we've merged them both together, and it's about the enforcing of mask wearing in hospitality venues and in shops. So they're both wanting to know what businesses can do to enforce the wearing of masks. Are business owners the ones responsible for that?
Well, this has been a real point of contention, I suppose, between various Stormont departments and also retail organisations, because since the introduction of face coverings in retail and hospitality and transport settings, really it was mandatory to do so. But when it came to enforcement, it always felt that shop owners and business owners felt that their staff shouldn't be on the front line of enforcement, and many shop workers and unions were saying, well, in terms of our members, they're on minimum wage or a national living wage, and it's really not enough for the hassle of telling some people or people, you must wear a face covering, because we had reported incidents of abuse for over the course of the pandemic now. So when it comes to that enforcement, there had been a lot of talk around COVID marshals at one point in different council districts, really to give people a bit of a reminder that you should be wearing a face covering. It is a requirement. But this week, with the reintroduction of face coverings in England in retail settings, a lot of the larger supermarkets and larger stores have come out and said, look, we've been here before. We'll have the signs up that they should be worn. We'll have people on the doors encouraging shoppers as they arrive. But it will be encouragement, it won't be enforcement, because we've been here before, we've gone through this, and I know it has been a real point of contention, particularly as of last week, between Stormont departments around whether or not justice and the police should be enforcing that. And in terms of fine numbers, I think we've had sort of fewer than 10 fines in Northern Ireland when it comes to the wearing of face coverings in those settings where they're required.
Thanks for that, Richard. We'll just have a look at some of the comments on Facebook. Mary-Louise, I'll come to you with this one. This is from Poddy, I think I'm pronouncing that right. He said, this is a comment that I've seen on social media a lot, so I'm interested to hear your response to this. He says, COVID cases are worse than ever. What does that say about the vaccine?
The number of COVID cases, positive COVID cases, certainly are rising. And today we saw the second highest number since January, which is quite shocking when you see 2,243 cases, new cases today. There are various reasons for that. First of all, the vaccine is waning. So the effectiveness of the vaccine is definitely wearing off on some people. A lot more people are mixing. That is definitely pushing numbers up. And what we're seeing, according to figures today, that the highest number of cases is really between 0 to 15-year-olds in schools. And this is why the JCVI are saying that we need to start vaccinating the younger generation as well, because there is proof there that more younger people now are becoming infected for whatever reason. It can't just be down to mixing more, because we've been mixing more for the last, 4 or 5 months, but that's certainly contributing to it. It is a hard one to crack, and I think that's why we have seen this massive boost to get the boosters up, because the authorities are saying saying, why are we seeing a bigger, much more significant increase in cases? And we have tried to suss this one out. We simply cannot comprehend why there has been not only this stubborn, steady increase of cases, they are simply not going down. And if you ask the officials, really they cannot explain why.
So just taking a look down here, we've got Danielle wants to know about Christmas parties. Obviously, Jane, I'll come to you with this one. There's been a lot of talk about whether, Christmas parties or family get-togethers should be cancelled, given concerns over this Omicron. What's the executive's view on this?
Well, we'd love to have them here, setting it out in pretty clear detail. Unfortunately, every time we have asked about this, the answer has not been clear. Last week, when the First and Deputy First Ministers gave a press conference, Paul Givan, the First Minister, basically said that, he didn't want to stop people going ahead with their Christmas plans, and if they plan to do it, then they should be doing it in line with all the rules and guidance that is already out there. But I'm sure Richard will tell you as well, the hospitality sector will say that it already feels like it has had hundreds upon hundreds of cancellations over the past couple of weeks. Now, some of them will say that is maybe in part to do with the COVID passport and people feeling more hesitant to go out, but others will say it is because the risk of COVID has increased around Christmas. People want to maybe stay in a bit more and kind of create a little bubble around themselves so that they can get those important days over Christmas to make sure that they are able to see the friends and family that they maybe haven't seen in quite some time. There's no clear guidance.
No. I think what the executive has done, they have laid out in terms of what's happening in hospitals. They have made very clear about the figures, how the COVID cases. They have laid all that out, and I think they're expecting and are hoping that the public are making up their own minds, that the onus is being put on.
Personal responsibility.
Yeah, personal responsibility. Now, some people might argue that that's very unfair. That's why we have politicians in place to offer clearer messaging, but that's been a running theme from the whole start of this pandemic, that we haven't had clear, direct, concise messaging from the executive from the word go, that there hasn't been that, and that has really let the hospitality sector down. Speaking in my world to nurses and doctors, they would say, if only they would come out and stand in unison together on a platform like they kind of did at the start, and give direction and provide that leadership. Because what I always look to is what's happening in Scotland. Nicola Sturgeon has been out there nearly every night, and she's back out doing those daily catch-ups and daily briefings. We haven't had that. And even on programmes, we haven't had the Chief Medical Officer, we haven't had live contributions from those senior officials, whether it be the Chief Scientific Advisor, the Chief Medical Officer. I'm trying to remember everybody here, the Health Minister. Yes, they have done some press briefings.
It's fair they came out, the First and Deputy First Ministers and the Health Minister did a joint press conference last Tuesday for the first time in quite a few months, actually. But I think the one thing to stress is that we are slightly different in Northern Ireland because we have a mandatory coalition. We have 5 parties in that executive. Most of the time, they don't agree or see eye to eye on how this should be going. And let's not forget that we are 6 months or so out from an election as well. And you have the parties on that footing already, taking chunks out of each other every day. So that makes it harder for them to stand beside each other at a press conference, giving out the same message, even if it's what people in certain sectors really want and really need.
I think that they really need to hear.
Yeah, and Richard, to bring you in on this, obviously we've mentioned hospitality there. Have you heard anything about the impact on, Christmas parties being cancelled or Christmas nights out being cancelled in the hospitality sector?
Well, I was looking at this issue over the course of the week, and it was described to me as there's been an avalanche of cancellations across the hospitality sector in Northern Ireland, and that was from Hospitality Ulster. But speaking to various hoteliers and business owners, I'm aware of one hotel that says in the last week or so they've had upwards of £150,000 worth of cancellations. Now that is in terms of leisure bookings, corporate events, Christmas parties. Same for another hotel in the northwest. About 25% of bookings have been lost, and they're pointing to various things. They're pointing initially to the COVID certification scheme, that there was some anxiety around how that would work. But now what they're really pointing to, as one person put to me, it's 90% messaging, that the certification scheme has come in, they're being kept open, but the message is, limit your social contacts, particularly at this time of year in the run up to Christmas. And then there are some businesses I'm aware of that are cancelling their Christmas parties because they don't want to be seen to be holding large scale events with lots of people all together that may look bad to the general public. So really, the sense I'm getting is that many people are cancelling their own plans. Businesses are cancelling because they're a bit worried about how it would look, and that the hospitality sector is saying that it's suffering. And this is both in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And at the end of the day, that will have an impact on the staff that work at those venues. But this isn't just an issue that we're experiencing on this island. Just today, it was on the news at 6 o'clock that the likes of Boohoo has moved its Christmas party to the spring. Deloitte is staggering it or having smaller events. So this is an issue that we're starting to see right across the UK. And I think just people are trying to make choices, particularly in the run up to Christmas, that they want to make sure maybe that they get to see their families, or that they're not bringing COVID home.
Yeah, just that extra caution. Just one last quick look at Facebook. Rose wants to know more about the evidence behind the use of vaccine passports. We've talked about that, Rose, earlier, so if you rewind just a little bit, you'll hear from Jane McCormick. You'll hear from Jane McCormick about the evidence behind the use of vaccine passports. But guys, that's about all we have time for tonight. We've put you through your paces. We've really put you to the test there with those questions.
I know.
It's good preparation for Jane's pub quiz later. So,
it was great.
And now you know how to pronounce Omicron. There we go.
And what number is it in the alphabet?
15.
15. A bit of trivia. Oh, there's Jane jumping in. She falls down.
Jane's competitive.
Very competitive.
I think we'd form a good pub quiz, maybe. Who knows? Coronavirus catch-up pub quiz. But just briefly, before we go, and we'll just take a quick look at the latest figures from the latest COVID-19 figures from the Department of Health for Northern Ireland. Today there was 2,272 new cases of coronavirus recorded, and sadly there has been 2 more deaths. There are 324 patients with COVID-19 in hospitals in Northern Ireland, and that's down from 332 yesterday. Well, that's it from us for now. Thanks to everyone who got in touch with their questions. Hopefully we've been able to clear things up a bit for you and give you the answers to those questions. Thanks again to Mary Louise, Jane and Richard for joining me tonight. And don't forget that you can keep up to date with all the latest news on the BBC News NI website, which you'll find at bbc.co.uk/newsni. And we're on social media as well. If you're watching us tonight on Facebook, you've already found our Facebook page, but we're on Twitter, YouTube and Instagram as well. Just type in BBC News NI when you're on there and we should pop up and you can hit follow. But that's it from us for tonight. Thanks for watching. See ya.